It was a quiet Friday morning in Denver, Colorado. Ethan, a 37-year-old architect, sat at his desk in the office, sipping his coffee as he looked over the blueprints for a towering skyscraper. This project was unlike any other he had ever worked on. It would be the largest and most significant project of his career. He had spent months pouring his heart and soul into it, hoping to make a name for himself in the world of architecture. The city skyline would soon bear the mark of his hard work. Ethan's life had always been steady, routine-driven. He woke up early, worked late, and found comfort in the predictability of his days. He had a partner, Julia, a 34-year-old social media manager, who he had married 5 years ago. Their relationship was built on shared passions, especially their love for outdoor activities. They spent their weekends hiking, biking, or simply walking around the city, enjoying the quiet moments that came with being together. It wasn't unusual for Ethan and Julia to enjoy their weekends alone, but this particular weekend, Julia suggested they invite an old friend over for dinner. Vanessa. Ethan had heard her name occasionally in passing, but he had never met her. Julia explained that Vanessa was a close friend from college in Los Angeles, someone she had lost touch with over the years. It would be nice to catch up, Julia said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He was not one for surprises, especially when it came to people he had never met. Vanessa? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. I don't think I've ever heard you mention her before. Julia smiled reassuringly. She's a good friend, Ethan. You'll like her. We haven't seen each other in years, but we've been meaning to reconnect. Ethan didn't want to cause any tension, so he nodded. All right if you say so. But a seed of doubt had been planted. There was something about Julia's eagerness that felt unfamiliar. As he settled back into his work, his mind drifted back to Vanessa. Why had Julia never mentioned her before? Why now? Later that day, as the clock ticked closer to lunch, Ethan found himself scrolling through his phone during a break. He wasn't usually one to pry, but something felt off about the whole situation. Out of idle curiosity, he opened Julia's social media account. He'd seen her browsing it 100 times, but he had never paid much attention to the posts, until now. As he scrolled through the photos, something caught his eye. There, among the usual images of trips they had taken and meals they had shared, was a photo of Julia with a woman. The photo was old, but the smile on Julia's face was undeniable. Ethan squinted at the image, realizing it was Vanessa, the woman Julia had just mentioned that morning. There were more photos too. A collection of moments shared between Julia and Vanessa during their college years. Laughing at a beach party. Standing side by side at a music festival. It was clear from the pictures that they had been close, very close. Ethan clicked on a photo to zoom in, and that's when he noticed the comments. Julia had written several heartfelt messages beneath the photos. I miss these times, one read. Another comment was a little more cryptic. You'll always be my rock, V. Ethan felt a strange tightening in his chest. He couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. It didn't make sense. Why hadn't Julia ever talked about Vanessa this way? Why were these photos so intimate? Something didn't add up. He tried to push the thoughts from his mind, but they lingered. It wasn't like him to overthink, but the more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. The next evening after dinner, as Julia settled into bed beside him, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The quiet of the night did little to calm his racing thoughts. He could hear Julia's soft breathing, but his mind was far from peaceful. He had never been the kind of person to invade someone's privacy, but the feeling gnawed at him. In the silence of the room, with only the faint hum of city lights outside the window, Ethan's hand moved toward the nightstand where Julia's phone lay charging. His heart pounded in his chest as his fingers brushed over the screen. He unlocked it without hesitation, an action he had never taken before. The screen came to life. His eyes scanned the recent messages and then he saw it, a text thread between Julia and Vanessa. As he read through the messages, the words blurred together. It was clear now, this wasn't just a friendship. The messages were filled with flirtation, inside jokes, and the kind of intimate language that he never thought he would see between Julia and someone else. Ethan's hands shook as he scrolled down further. Julia and Vanessa hadn't just been close friends. They had shared something deeper, something passionate. They had even talked about meeting again after all these years. The messages grew more explicit as Ethan read on. His stomach dropped. Julia had been hiding something from him, something far bigger than a mere friendship. There it was, in black and white. Julia and Vanessa had rekindled their connection in the last few months, and it wasn't just innocent catching up. They were planning to meet again, soon. Ethan slowly set the phone back down on the nightstand. He felt a wave of shock, disbelief, and hurt wash over him. He could barely process what he had just read. His wife, the woman he had loved for years, had been hiding this secret life from him. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of their entire relationship. The room felt suffocating and Ethan's mind spun with a million thoughts. How long had this been going on? Was there more? The questions piled on, each one more painful than the last. His eyes fluttered closed as he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. But deep down he knew. This was just the beginning of something much more difficult. His world was about to be turned upside down. The following morning, Ethan could barely bring himself to face Julia. He had barely slept, the conversation in his mind replaying over and over. How could she have kept this secret from him for so long? And why now, after all these years, did Vanessa suddenly reappear? He tried to go about his day, but his thoughts kept spiraling. At work, he found himself staring at his computer screen, unable to focus on the intricate details of the skyscraper he was designing. Every line on the blueprint seemed to blur. The stress in his chest made it hard to breathe, and he kept replaying the text messages he had seen the night before. Julia and Vanessa weren't just old friends. They were something more, something hidden in plain sight. At lunch, Ethan couldn't help himself. He opened Julia's social media again, more out of impulse than curiosity. The pictures with Vanessa were still there. The comments. The flirtations. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Why didn't he notice? How could he have been so blind? As he sat in his office, staring at the screen, a realization hit him like a cold wave. Julia had been hiding pieces of herself from him for a long time. The woman in the photos wasn't the Julia he had married. This was someone else. Someone who had a history, a past that Ethan had never fully understood. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on. His suspicions grew as he tried to recall every conversation, every moment where something felt off, but that nagging voice in his head kept saying, "You missed it. You should have known." That evening when Ethan came home, Julia was already preparing dinner. Her presence was soothing, and he felt a pang of guilt for the storm of thoughts brewing inside him. He had to confront her, but he didn't know how. He couldn't shake the fear that if he did, he might lose everything he thought he knew about her and about their life together. "Hey," Julia greeted him with a smile, her voice light. "How was your day?" Ethan forced a smile back, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Just busy." The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan could feel it in the air, the distance that had suddenly opened up between them. Every word felt like it was carefully chosen, as if they were both trying to keep something hidden. Julia, for her part, seemed unaware of the storm brewing within him. She was still the same woman he had married, yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was a part of her he would never truly know. The dinner was quiet, punctuated only by the sound of silverware clinking against plates. Ethan's mind was racing. His stomach churned with unease as he looked across the table at Julia, who seemed content and unaware of the war raging inside him. Finally, when the meal was over, Ethan couldn't take it any longer. He had to know. He had to ask. "Julia?" he began, his voice low. "Tell me about Vanessa." Julia looked up, surprised by the sudden question. Her expression shifted slightly, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "What about her?" Ethan swallowed hard. "You've mentioned her before, but I don't know much about her. I just saw a lot of old photos of you two together. It looks like you were really close. More than just friends." Julia's eyes flickered for a moment and Ethan's heart sank. "We were close. She was my best friend back in college," she said, her tone steady, but Ethan could sense the hesitation behind her words. "Best friends, huh?" Ethan pushed, trying to keep his voice calm, though he felt his hands tighten into fists under the table. "I saw the messages between you two, Julia. The ones from recently. And the pictures, those weren't just memories. You two have reconnected. But it seems like there's more to it." Julia's face paled slightly. She set down her fork and looked away, her fingers gripping the edge of her plate. "Ethan, it's not what you think." His heart beat faster. "Then tell me. What is it?" There was a long pause before Julia spoke again, her voice softer now, laced with something that sounded almost like regret. "We've been talking for a while now. And things have changed. But it's not what you think. I never meant for you to find out this way." Ethan's chest tightened. His mind reeled with the implications. "What do you mean things have changed?" "Julia, this isn't just about a friendship anymore. This is more than that, isn't it?" Julia exhaled slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "Yes, it's more than that. We've reconnected. And it's complicated." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. The woman he had married, the woman he thought he knew, had been hiding a truth so big, so significant, that he felt like everything in their relationship was a lie. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and Ethan wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. "I'm sorry," Julia added quietly, her voice trembling. "But I never meant to hurt you. This was my decision, not hers." Ethan's world tilted. "Your decision?" He leaned forward, his voice shaky. "Julia, you've been hiding this from me for months. And now you're telling me you're planning to meet her? To what end? What are you doing?" Julia looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I never wanted it to come to this. I didn't want to hurt you." The words stung more than anything Ethan had ever heard. He sat back, feeling the numbness spread through his limbs. All at once, the realization hit him. Julia was no longer the woman he had married. The woman who promised to be his partner through everything was now someone he didn't even recognize. Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't do this. I need time, Julia." He walked out of the room, leaving Julia sitting there, staring after him. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. His mind was swirling, his thoughts crashing over him like a violent storm. He paced through the streets of Denver, his footsteps echoing in the cool night air. His heart was heavy and his chest felt tight. His whole world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The woman he had loved, the woman he had married, had just confessed to a betrayal so deep, he wasn't sure if he could ever look at her the same way again. It wasn't just the affair with Vanessa. It was the lie. The deception. The years of trust he had given Julia, only to discover that trust had been shattered long ago. Ethan had always believed in honesty, in open communication, and now he was faced with a painful reality that he wasn't sure how to navigate. As the hours passed, he found himself walking toward Cherry Creek, the upscale area in the city where he had always dreamed of living. It was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside him. He wasn't sure where to go or what to do, but he knew he couldn't stay in the house they had shared. The next morning when the sun rose, Ethan was still awake. His mind had not found rest, and the conversation from the night before kept replaying over and over. Julia's confession had been like a dagger to his heart. She had admitted it, she and Vanessa weren't just reconnecting. They had rekindled something much more intimate, and Julia had kept it from him for months. Worse still, she had planned to leave him. It was clear now that Julia's feelings for Vanessa went far beyond friendship. She had chosen Vanessa over him. The decision felt inevitable. Ethan had to leave. He couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies and secrets. Julia had reached out multiple times that morning, texting him and even calling, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to answer. He knew what he needed to do and he had no intention of dragging things out. After days of internal turmoil, Ethan finally sent a text. "I think it's time we talked. I'm moving out today." When Julia arrived at the house later that afternoon, her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She had clearly been up all night, waiting for a sign, any sign, that Ethan would change his mind. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Please, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to understand that." Ethan stood at the door, his arms crossed over his chest. His heart ached seeing her like this, but he couldn't let that cloud his judgment. "You've already hurt me, Julia," he said, his voice firm though it broke slightly. "You've lied to me for months. You've kept something this big from me." She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could fix things before you ever found out. But I made a mistake, Ethan. Please, I want to work this out. We can fix this together." Ethan's heart wrenched. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to go back to the way things were. But he couldn't. He couldn't ignore the betrayal that had taken root in their marriage. "No, Julia," he replied, his voice shaking with emotion. "You made a choice. You chose her over me, over us. I can't do this anymore." Julia's face crumpled. She reached out, her hands shaking as if to touch him, but Ethan stepped back. "You've already made up your mind," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I never wanted this." Ethan closed his eyes, trying to block out the pain of the moment. "I'm sorry too," he said, his voice hollow. "But I can't stay in a marriage where trust is gone. I have to go." The divorce proceedings were quick and painful. Ethan moved out of the house they had shared and found a new place in Cherry Creek, a sleek apartment that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't much, just a small space with a view of the city, but it was his. It was a place where he could start rebuilding piece by piece. Over the next few months, Ethan kept to himself. He focused on his work, diving deeper into the skyscraper project, finding solace in the plans and designs that kept his mind occupied. He returned to his love for hiking, something he had stopped doing when his life had become so consumed by his marriage. Now, with weekends free from obligation, he spent his days in the mountains, hiking trails he had always wanted to explore. The vastness of the landscapes helped put things into perspective. Though he felt an ache for the life he had lost, he also felt a sense of freedom. It was a bittersweet kind of peace, but it was his peace. Julia's life, on the other hand, had taken a much darker turn. After the scandal broke, she found herself isolated and cut off from many of her friends. Her reputation in the industry was tarnished, and the job she had relied on for stability was gone. She managed to find a new job as an event planner, but it wasn't the same. Her past loomed over her like a shadow, and no matter how hard she tried, it was impossible to escape the consequences of her actions. She called Ethan once just to check in, but he didn't pick up. There were no more texts, no more casual conversations. They were both moving on in their own separate ways, though the weight of the past still lingered. Ethan had made his choice. And though it hurt, he knew it was the right one. He was learning to live without her. Learning to rediscover himself. And though he was still uncertain about what the future held, he could feel the pieces of his life slowly coming back together. The months passed and Denver's seasons shifted as they always did. Ethan began to embrace his new life. He wasn't the man he had been 6 months ago, but maybe that was a good thing. The pain of the betrayal had faded, replaced by a quieter kind of sadness. An understanding that some things couldn't be fixed no matter how much you wanted them to be. He had spent so much of his life investing in someone else, believing in a future that now seemed so distant. But through it all, Ethan had discovered something about himself he hadn't realized before. His own strength. The apartment in Cherry Creek had become a sanctuary. It was simple, but it had a sense of peace that his old house never had. He'd furnished it with only the essentials, nothing that felt too permanent, but everything that felt like it belonged. He had even added a small corner by the window where he could sit and sketch, something he hadn't done in years. His passion for architecture was reignited, and the skyscraper project that had once felt like an overwhelming weight now felt like a bright opportunity. On the weekends, Ethan explored the hiking trails that wound through the Rocky Mountains. He found solace in the quiet expanses of nature, where the only sound was the crunch of gravel under his boots and the rush of the wind through the trees. It gave him time to think, or rather, to not think at all. He let the peace of the mountains quiet his mind, away from the noise of his old life. And in those moments, when the sun dipped below the peaks and the sky turned that brilliant shade of orange, Ethan started to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He had a future ahead of him, and though it was uncertain, it was his to shape. It wasn't long before he found himself reconnected with old friends. He joined a local architects group, and through them he met people who shared his passion for design. One evening, while attending a networking event, he struck up a conversation with another architect named Rachel. She was confident, smart, and had a passion for sustainable design much like Ethan. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in a while: connection. Over the next few weeks they met for coffee and then for dinner. They shared stories about their careers, their hopes, and even their past relationships. Rachel had her own story of loss, but unlike Julia, she had learned from it. She was building her own life, one step at a time. The more they spoke, the more Ethan found himself looking forward to seeing her again. But even as things started to grow between them, Ethan remained cautious. He wasn't looking for anything serious, not yet. He wasn't sure he was ready to trust again. But Rachel wasn't asking for anything he wasn't ready to give. They took things slowly, allowing the connection to deepen naturally. Julia's life, meanwhile, had taken a much harder turn. Despite landing a job as an event planner, she struggled to regain her footing. Her reputation was still in tatters, and people in the industry whispered behind her back. She had tried to move on, but it wasn't easy. Every time she turned a corner, she was reminded of the life she had thrown away, of the man she had hurt. She spent long hours at her new job, keeping busy in an attempt to distract herself. But when the workday ended, she was left alone with her thoughts. The silence in her apartment was deafening, and she found herself often looking at old photos, ones of her and Ethan from their happier days. She had never realized how much those memories meant to her until they were gone. Despite everything, Julia still felt a pull toward Ethan. There were times when she would pick up the phone to call him, but each time she hesitated. She knew he was moving on. She knew that she had no right to ask for anything from him anymore. Her new job had introduced her to a new circle of friends, but she felt like an outsider. Everyone was so different from the people she had once known. It was hard to fit in, and sometimes when she was sitting alone at night, she wondered if she would ever truly recover from the mess she had made of her life. Ethan's work was thriving. The skyscraper project he had been working on for months was nearing completion, and it was shaping up to be a major success. His name was starting to be recognized in the industry, and he felt a sense of pride he hadn't known in a long time. He was no longer just the man who had been betrayed, he was someone who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. One evening, as he was reviewing the final plans for the project, his phone buzzed with a message. He didn't recognize the number, but the message was clear. "Ethan, I need to talk to you. Please, can we meet?" It was from Julia. Ethan stared at the message for a long time before deciding to respond. He wasn't sure if he was ready to see her, but something inside him told him it was time to face the past, once and for all. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in the city, the same place they had gone to on their first date. When Julia arrived, she looked different. Her hair was slightly longer, her face pale, her eyes tired. There was a sadness in her that hadn't been there before. She sat down across from him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Julia broke the silence. "I've made so many mistakes, Ethan. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for everything I did to you. I hurt you in ways I can't even explain. I can never take it back, but I just needed you to know that I regret everything." Ethan looked at her, feeling a mix of emotions. The hurt he had felt so deeply was still there, but so was a strange kind of relief. He had moved on, but hearing her words, hearing her apology, helped close a door that had been left ajar for far too long. "I'm sorry too, Julia," Ethan said quietly. "For not seeing the signs, for not being more aware. But I've learned a lot since then. I've learned to trust myself again." Julia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I hope you find happiness, Ethan. I truly do." As the conversation ended, Ethan felt something inside him shift. The past wasn't something he could undo, but it no longer had the power to control him. He had found his way back to himself, and that was enough. He didn't need the past to define him. The future was waiting. As he walked away from the cafe, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The sun was setting over Denver, casting long shadows across the city. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel the weight of the past. He was ready to move forward, one step at a time.